I'd like to call the meeting to order. Can we start with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. We are here for one reason and one reason only. That's why there is no agenda for this town board meeting. We're here to talk about the state's HAB action program. HAB stands for harmful algae blooms. It is an action plan that has been prepared by the state, which makes specific recommendations for improving the water quality within Putnam Lake. I'd like to start off by thanking the VFW for allowing us the use of this facility, and in particular, Michael Carney, who is commander. With that, I'd like to introduce Vincent Perrin, who is with the Putnam County Health Department, who will start us off by explaining what harmful algae blooms really are. I don't know how the town board wants to do this. I don't intend to sit here while we're doing this. I don't know if you'd like to go out in the audience so you could watch the presentation as well.
I figured we'd switch around.
Yeah. All right.
Front row seat.
You're up.
Do you have a mic that you want him to use?
Everyone hear me okay?
You've got to use the mic.
Over here. Fine. Over here. Let's not mess anything up.
It's not, because I'm going to take it off anyway.
Oh, okay. Well, that works out. You taped the floor over there, too.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got plenty of that.
Okay, is this any better? Good? All right. As Supervisor Williams said, my name is Vincent Perrin. I'm with the Putnam County Department of Health. I've been, unfortunately, dealing with these blue-green algae blooms for the last 7 or 8 years. They're widespread. It's not just Putnam Lake. It's not just Putnam County. It's not just New York State. It's all across the country, all across the world. We see them more and more no matter where we look. And it seems like there's no escaping them, unfortunately. So I'm just here to give you guys a little bit of an education about it, what they are, why they're harmful, and some pictures to take a look at. So what is blue-green algae? Let me back it up. Supervisor Williams spoke about the HABs action plan. That's hazardous algal blooms. Blue-green algae is the type of harmful algal bloom that we deal with. We don't have open water. We don't have red tides, which is also another harmful algal bloom. So when we talk about lakes, those two anagrams are kind of interchangeable, BGA, HAB, or sometimes, as you see up there, cyanobacteria. That's the family that the blue-green algae blooms are part of. They're opportunistic in favorable conditions, elevated nutrients, warm temperature, stagnant water, water that's not moving, lots of sun, lots of nutrients. That's what they do. Anything that could help a plant grow will help this grow. The only difference is that it prefers slightly less hospitable conditions. So where you would have trouble with weeds or other plant life growing, these things thrive. And that's the problem, is as soon as they become the apex producer, they take over the lake. And we just see that year after year. That's why you see it progressively getting worse everywhere. Unless something's done about it, that is. So what do they look like? These pictures I stole from the DEC with their permission. These are not local ones. I do have some local photos later. So the blooms can look reddish, greenish, whitish, brownish. Pick a color, it can look that color. And you can ask certain people in the audience. This year we have seen them every color you can think of. What type of illnesses can it cause? So the reason blue-green algae is really of a concern is the type of toxins that it releases. And that's only one of the things it can do. It can release all sorts of different toxins which can affect the body differently. Neurotoxin, hemotoxin, hepatotoxin, you name it, different strains can produce different ones, and in varying concentrations. And on top of that, in the life cycle of the bloom, sometimes they're released earlier, sometimes they're released later, sometimes they're released at the end, sometimes they're released all the way through. Sometimes they're not released until the actual algal particle dies. So if you're looking at a bloom, you don't know in what cycle it's in, so you don't know what the concentrations of the toxins can be, so you don't know whether or not it's safe. So the general rule of thumb is if you see a bloom, avoid it and stay out of it. So general contact, drinking, swallowing, obviously if you see a green painty water, you're not going to want to go swimming in it. It looks like you're swimming in green latex paint. But the concern is the smaller blooms that you might not see right away. If you start seeing them, you want to stay away from them. You don't want to wade through them. You don't want to shoo them out of your swimming area. You don't want to try and sink them with the oar of a boat. You want to just stay away from it, because even the inhalation of it when it starts aerosolizing, so when the water splashes up, if you start inhaling enough of that, that can begin to cause respiratory issues after a long time. It can cause normal coughing, sneezing, etc. But in addition to actual contact, you can get itchiness, numbness, redness, dermatitis, a bunch of various issues. And some people, obviously, with everything else, are more sensitive to different strains than other people are. How do people get exposed? Like I said, most people won't go swimming through a big pile of green. So recreational exposures is still the major one, as opposed to swimming or wading, boating or fishing. It's the most common way people run into it is when they're not expecting it. If you're going to a regulated beach and there's a bloom there, chances are that you're either already self-closed, doing their due diligence, or a health department employee was out there and closed them already. Putnam Lake has been a great partner with us through the beginning, and they've always been very quick to report, very quick to see it, very quick to inform us. And the residents have always been very diligent about trying to not go into it. Of the lakes that we've had closed and the beaches we've had closed, when there's a closure, we get the least phone calls from Putnam Lake. It's almost like there's an understanding. When we say don't go in, you say okay. It's nice. We've increased signage. There's better signage. I was dealing with Supervisor Williams. There's some nice laminated signs that they've been putting up on the fence lines. And we've gotten some new language from the state guidance that's been put out there for identification purposes and just educational purposes, which is available at every beach. Well, Jackson and Warren. So other types of ways people are getting exposed, you see New York State regulated recreational area. And if you look at the bottom, there's two ways the people were exposed. The first one was someone hopped the fence. They closed the beach already, and someone hopped the fence. Some people are dedicated. So to just leave it off, I'm just going to go through some photos of some blue-green algae that we've actually seen in Putnam County. The first one, that's Lake Mayapack. This was a fast-moving bloom. This happened right outside of the only regulated beach on the lake, unfortunately, so we can't get a great view of it. Came and went in a few days. It was very telltale, very wispy, very blue, very green. It looked like turquoise water almost. Just stood out like someone painted it. Sharp edges. It was obvious there was something going wrong. Putnam Lake. If anyone was trying to go to the beach earlier this year in June, you guys would know that you were closed for a weekend. This is the style of the blue-green algae that we saw. This is the first time we've really had a closure, except for Labor Day 2 years ago. And besides that, you guys haven't had a closure in years. Mostly because you've been doing some treatment and the treatment you're doing is kind of putting a Band-Aid on something that's already going on. You have the blooms, they are growing, you're treating them to get rid of them. Lake Carmel, that's the classic bloom, and in most of the presentations you see come out of my office, this picture will be involved because it's very clear where you see the swirls, and you can see the pattern, and you can see that sharp edge of where the bloom ends and the regular water begins. Lake Secor, Roaring Brook. As you can tell, that is neither blue nor green, but that is what it looks like when the blue-green algae is at the end of its life cycle, which in most cases is when it's releasing the most amount of toxins, and actually can be the most hazardous for something to go into. And this is what Put Lake looked like back in 2012. I don't know if anyone remembers that. You guys had various closures. Beaches were closed for extended periods of time. And that was just when we, and by we I mean health departments, DEC, everyone, we were just learning about blue-green algae, how to combat it, where does it come from, what starts it, what helps it grow, and really putting the regulations together to keep people safe. And that's all the information I have. As always, if you have any questions about blue-green algae, you can always reach us at the office. We're available 5 days a week. Call, and we have very many knowledgeable people on staff that are always willing to help answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Vincent, for that. Very informative. So we're here tonight to talk about the Harmful Algae Bloom Action Plan. This is a plan that was prepared by New York State. It had very limited input from the town. Hank Earl, chairman of the Park Advisory Board, and myself were both on the steering committee. We attended one meeting, and I got to sit in on 2 additional meetings to talk about the sewers, because it seems that the principal thrust from the DEC was they are very interested in seeing us sewer the lake. So this was a proposal by the governor. It came out in December as part of his State of the State. It was supposed to be a $65 million 4-point initiative. Initially, it was advertised that each lake, 12 lakes were selected, and each lake was to get $500,000 to look at a study that was going to look at the principal causes of the blue-green algae that was occurring within each of the lakes. The 12 lakes were selected based on their vital tourism and the fact that they were also critical sources of drinking water. These are the 9 lakes that were selected in other areas: the Western Group, Central Group, and North County Group. And then this was our immediate area. Lake Carmel and Palmer Lake over in the town of Kent were 2 of the lakes selected. Monhegan Brook Watershed was also selected, as well as Putnam Lake was included in the study. Within the body of the report, there are some details about Putnam Lake. Overall, it's got a mean depth of 11 feet with a maximum depth of 17 feet. It's got drainage surface area of 7.6, a watershed of 1,717 acres, and a hydraulic retention time of 9 months. And that's a very important point, because the hydraulic retention time allows for the accumulation of nutrients and elevated temperatures that actually lead to harmful algae blooms occurring.
Could you explain what that is, a retention time?
The retention time is the amount of time that a drop of water first enters the lake and passes all the way through the lake and then goes over the spillway. The amount of time that the water sits in the lake. Varying water bodies have different retention times. For example, the East Branch Croton Reservoir has a retention time of 55 days. Others, like Croton Falls, I believe it's closer to 2 years. So the principal causes of algae bloom, it's basically like baking a cake. You have your nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. Phosphorus is always the element that we talk about, because it is the one that is least abundant within a water body typically, and it is the one that drives the algae blooms. Nitrogen is so abundant that it's not really a pollutant of concern. Phosphorus can be divided into particulate phosphorus and dissolved phosphorus. Most of the phosphorus running into the lake from the streams and erosion within the watershed is going to be in the particulate form. Once it gets into the lake, then certain functions of the lake chemistry will start breaking it down into dissolved phosphorus. It's the dissolved phosphorus that's actually the biggest concern, because it is being dissolved is the way that it is most readily available to the algae blooms. There one other type of particulate phosphorus, and that is the particulate phosphorus over leaf matter and other organic matter. That breaks down once it gets into the lake as it decomposes, also releasing the phosphorus as dissolved phosphorus. And when you have the right nutrient combination with sunlight and temperatures, then you start to see your algae blooms. The HAB action plan made a number of different, identified the significant sources of phosphorus loading in the lake. Those sources are from septic system discharges, from nutrients coming into the watershed, non-point source runoff, basically stormwater, and internal loading of nutrients and legacy phosphorus, the phosphorus that's already in the lake that breaks down due to the lake chemistry. The action plan also took a look using a couple of different programs that DEC and the consultant were using. One is LENS, the other is MapShed, as to where phosphorus was coming from the watershed. And here are the numbers for the different areas that were generating phosphorus. Developed land, 12% of the phosphorus reaching the lake was coming from developed land. When you get into septic load, they estimated that 25% of the phosphorus going into the lake was from the septic systems within 250 feet of the lake. I think that number may be a little bit high, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. The DEC seemed very focused on, the septic systems, as I said earlier, and they targeted the septic load going into the lake. 25% of it was from the septic systems. One of the concerns I have with the overall assumptions in the report is the fact that when you're looking at a watershed plan and stormwater runoff and trying to capture the phosphorus that's coming in off the watershed, the phosphorus that's generated from developed land and stream bank really need to be combined. And when you do that, you see that actually the watershed is generating more phosphorus than the septic load is. They also identified that 28% of the phosphorus that's being made available to algae is coming from the phosphorus that's already in the lake. So the DEC, or I say the state's action plan, broke down its recommendations into 6 different areas: Priority 1 projects, Priority 2 projects, additional watershed management actions, in-lake management actions, monitoring and research actions. I'm going to start kind of in the middle of all their recommendations, and that was the in-lake management actions. And I'm not exactly sure why they put that in the middle of all their recommendations, because for me, this is kind of the philosophy about what we need to do to take a look at the lake. And that's reductions in phosphorus loading from external points to non-point sources, i.e. stormwater runoff, should be the primary objective to reducing the amount of phosphorus entering the lake. Second, in-lake management actions can be used to minimize the mobilization of the phosphorus that's in the lake. And third, controlled use of the algicide could be continue to be employed to reduce the HABs. Priority 1 projects are those that are considered necessary to manage water quality and reduce the HABs in Putnam Lake. Short term, 3 years, the use of alum to inactivate the phosphorus that's already in the lake. 3 to 5 years, they're looking for us to evaluate construction of a wastewater treatment plant. In the plan, it suggested that the wastewater treatment plant would be sized to accommodate up to 1,200 homes or 240,000 gallons of sanitary effluent. The recommendations also included installing multiple stormwater BMTs to reduce sediment loading into the lake. And last of the Priority 1 projects was dredging. If the alum didn't work, and I will tell you all that alum will work, but it is not a long-term solution. Alum generally has a useful life of 7 to 11 years, after which you have to retreat the lake. So there were Priority 2 projects that were recommended. included purchasing a street sweeping vacuum truck. Now, we met with the consultant. I explained to them that we have 3 street sweepers, and that we have Russ Goff, who gets out there as soon as the last snowflake drops and cleans the roads, and he does a phenomenal job. It also, priority 2 projects was to stabilize riparian habitat. Well, this is usually stream-based stabilization, which also ties into one of the priority 1 projects, installing BMPs. And lastly, they had aeration as a priority 2 project. There were a number of monitoring actions recommended. Continue the CSLAP program. I don't know if we can do that. I know the people who are doing it have been doing it quite some time, Pat Ploger and Hank Earl, and it takes quite a bit of time, and I think they're looking to do other things and move on. So we may be looking for volunteers if anybody is interested in doing that. And it made a number of recommendations to look at other areas of the lake, collect data regarding the taxa of the cyanobacteria, analyze water quality samples. It also recommended some research actions that we could be looking at, evaluating upstream sources of nutrients and measure nutrient levels, measure phosphorus concentrations within the lake sediments, evaluate the potential for utilizing functional traits of the dominant cyanobacteria. I'm not sure where we're going to go with that one. Also, evaluate the impact of traditional copper algicides. Personally, I'd rather be moving away from the use of copper algicides and the Q-train that we're using. But I commend the Park District for using the Q-train because it's what's been keeping our lake open. Also, one of the research actions was to complete a study to evaluate the influence of groundwater and septic inputs on phosphorus concentrations within the Putnam Lake. This is to replicate a study that was done by the USGS in 2000. Some of you may remember that. USGS came in, they put in a number of groundwater wells around the lake and tested the groundwater that was passing through. I would like to see that study redone and a couple of more wells put in, and I'll explain why. So just to recap, the priority 1 projects were the alum treatment of the lake, the wastewater treatment plant, installing stormwater BMPs, and dredging. And really why we're here tonight is so that the town board can hear from all of you about what you would like to see us proceed forward with, what your priority is, because there's going to be certainly a cost with any one of these projects. Some of that we hope we can get state grants to cover those costs, but we know that we're not going to be able to get everything fully funded. For those of you who don't know what alum is, well, it's for those of you who ever cut yourself shaving, it's also what you use in a styptic pencil to stop the bleeding, but it's a chemical that when it's added to a body of water creates a flux. It binds with the phosphorus and it causes it to drop out of the water column, ends up down in the bottom sediments. One of the deficiencies within the HAB action plan is they didn't give us a lot of costs. As a matter of fact, the only costs they did give us was regarding the wastewater treatment options. So I looked at a number of different lakes throughout the area as far west as Wisconsin about what it was costing them to treat their lake with alum. I came up with a wide range. It really depends on how much alum you need to put in the lake to accomplish what the goals are. So my best guess for the cost of treating the lake with alum is somewhere between $120,000 and $350,000. It could go higher. I know lakes that were out in Wisconsin, similar size to Putnam Lake, and it was $750,000. So alum is not currently permitted as a treatment technique within New York State, but the DEC, recognizing the problems that we're having across the state with phosphorus concentrations within the lake and blue-green algae, They are currently seriously evaluating the use of alum. Because the DEC has never really evaluated what the impact on the ecology would be, and so they've never allowed it as a treatment technique within the lakes. So they're currently reevaluating their position. If the community wants to go forward with alum treatment, the next steps, I believe, and this is coming from me, would be that we need to measure the concentrations within the lake sediments to evaluate the potential for internal loading. I think we should be doing that anyway, taking a look at how much phosphorus has really been sequestered within the lake sediments. And also conduct a study to evaluate the potential effects that alum treatment would have on the lake's ecology. That's going to be an absolute must if we're going to apply for the permits, and there's a long involved permitting process, including the DEC, the Army Corps, and New York City DEP if we were going to try to treat the lake with alum. So the second management action that the plan recommended was to look at wastewater collection and treatment within the lake. The state retained O'Brien Gear to do a feasibility analysis on sewering the lake. They looked at a number of different options, including residential on-site septic systems with advanced treatment, gravity collection, pressure systems, vacuum systems, and whether there was the availability for the lake to create a collection system and tie in to an existing plant so that a new plant didn't need to get built, or whether there needed to be a new wastewater treatment plant constructed. After evaluating all those options, and there's a report, we've posted it up online, anybody wants to take a look at it. The recommendation coming out of the sewer study completed by O'Brien Gear was a gravity collection system for properties within a 250-foot offset from the shoreline. That would provide sewage treatment for 287 properties in what they designated as Area 1. And the approximate cost of doing that, including construction of a new sewage treatment plant, was $25 million. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Rich, how are you? If I might ask you one little question. Chris, can you ask him the podium, please?
Come on over here to the mic.
Oh, you're talking to
Yeah, you got
this.
to talk into the mic.
Christopher Lawler, 12 Utica Road. On this plan, and what did you say it was?
25 million?
25 million? Is that including the blasting, trying to find the pump stations, trying to find out how you can actually do this? I mean, is this realistic, or is this just like something somebody looked on a piece of paper and said, oh yeah, we'll just do this, do that? You can't put no pump stations no place. They'll be below water.
I understand. Why don't you let me get through this portion?
I'm just,
To answer your question, they did a feasibility analysis of where they would put pump stations, sewer lines.
where would they be?
Well,
Is there a plan for it?
there are concept plans, yes. So let me get through this. Here's the area that we're talking about, Chris. So in purple, okay, in purple is the Area 1.
All around the lake.
That's within 250 feet of the lake. The red area is supposed to represent the rest of the watershed draining down into Putnam Lake. They've actually got the red line in the wrong place, but the red line represents Area 2. So let me keep going.
Yep.
All right. So here is the cost, the table that was presented in the feasibility plan for the sewer systems, looking at a number of different options for providing for wastewater treatment plants. It was option 3, if I can do this. Yep, this option right here which is the one that was recommended, which included the Area 1 collection system and the wastewater treatment plant. So it's only a preliminary analysis.
I understand what you're saying preliminary. Do you realize how much rock blast?
Yes.
Not even blasting, because you can't blast.
I know the area.
You have to hammer everything
I know the area.
to go through it.
Yep.
Do you think this is realistic?
It's not up to me
No,
to say.
no, I understand.
Okay, so,
I'm just saying, do you
so-
think this is realistic?
Chris, I'm going to tell you right now, I have my opinion on whether we should be pursuing sewers in the lakes. I'm not going to offer
That's
my
exactly
opinion.
what I'm saying.
I'm not going to offer my opinion because what we're here tonight for is to hear everybody else's opinion. And if everybody else wants us to pursue it, that's what we're going to do. And if everybody else says that this cost is way too high, that we want to look at other options, well, that's what we're going to do.
But have we looked at other options?
Well, no, but that's, yeah, well, that's what we're doing now. Yes.
We've been doing this for years. I've told you what the problems are, and now
I know.
you're looking at
No.
putting in pump
All right.
stations,
So,
sewer
Chris,
systems.
Let me get through the rest of this, and then
Yep, we can
we'll
talk
go through
about
this.
it.
All right, so the report also, the feasibility report also looked at the size of the plant. I believe I alluded to it earlier. For Area 1, they were looking at an 80,000 gallon per day plant. For sewering all of Putnam Lake, they were looking at a 300,000 gallon per day plant. They did a cost analysis about what they think preliminarily this might cost. So the capital cost for the sewer is $15 million. The capital cost for the, the $15 million is for the sewer collection system. The wastewater treatment plant would cost roughly $9.3 million. From the 1997 MOA that the county signed with New York City is obligated to pay a portion of any new wastewater treatment plant. They have to pay for the equipment to treat the tertiary, the effluent to a tertiary standard. The DEP's contribution would be about $5 million. The total, subtracting that from the overall cost would bring the overall cost down to $19 million. Then when you figure in the New York State EFC financing, which would be the cheapest financing the town could get to pursue the program, we're down to about $873,000 a year, with $160,000 in O&M. Now, that was their estimate for running an 80,000 gallon per day plant. I can tell you that in the Patterson Hamlet, we are running an 80,000 gallon per day plant. We're not paying $160,000 to run that plant annually. We're paying $400,000 annually. So that cost would all come back onto the ratepayers that are being benefited by the sewer plant. So at the end of the day, they came back and took a look at what it would cost individually, each property owner. And the cost would be about $3,422 per property owner to sewer the lake. Now, before everybody gets excited, they fully recognize that that is totally unrealistic, and that they are willing, the state is willing to support the town pursuing grants to help offset that cost.
What if we don't get the grants?
Well, then we don't go forward.
Well, yeah, but then we started the project, we don't get the grants, we gotta stop.
Get the grant before you start the project.
Thank you. Yes.
That's not what he
All right, well, so Chris, there's a long involved process in this, all right? And we're gonna get to it. We're gonna get to it. So the next steps, if the community wants to go forward with sewering 250 feet around the lake, we need to conduct the study to evaluate the influence of the groundwater and septic inputs on phosphorus concentrations in the lake. And I threw that in there because of the 2000 USGS study, which seemed to indicate there was not a lot of phosphorus moving through the groundwater into the lake. And I would like to see that replicated so that we can confirm that we're actually going to be benefiting the lake as much as the action plan says we're going to be benefiting the lake. Because if a lot less phosphorus is moving through the groundwater, if say it's only 10 or 12%, and we're spending $25 million to take 10 or 12% away, we're not really doing the lake any service. We would need to find a location to site this new wastewater treatment plant. That's going to be challenging in and of itself. I do have a couple of locations that, I have looked at, and so we do have some ideas. And then, Chris, the next step would be to retain an engineering firm to complete a preliminary design and refine the cost estimates, to see if the cost estimates hold up, to see more specifically where they're going to put pump stations, the size of the sewer, everything else.
But, excuse me, I have to interrupt you. Didn't we do this before, when we went around with the county, state, and everybody else, showed you where the problems were, and everybody said, oh, there is a problem here, coming from the Fairfield, coming from here, and nobody ever did nothing. Now that the part, the town owns it, all of a sudden, oh, we could do all of this work. So whatever happened with all the studies that we did and you did nothing with?
Well, I won't say we've done nothing with, because...
You did absolutely nothing with it. You did not do one thing with it.
Chris, I've got hydrodynamic separators around the lake. I've got
I understand
plunge
that.
pools around the
We
lake.
showed you
All right, Chris.
all of this stuff.
Thanks, Chris.
And
We're not going to...
You want to charge me another $3,000 in taxes? Hey, great.
Okay.
Chris, you're not even in the district. You wouldn't be in the septic district.
All right. So,
Where are you going to put the septic district?
all right. So the fourth,
You're an electrician, Mike, shut up.
the third recommendation in the action plan was to install stormwater BMPs around the lake. Stormwater BMPs are rain gardens, green infrastructure, stormwater ponds, plunge pools, hydrodynamic separators, which we've installed, stream bank stabilization, jellyfish. I always love that one. Jellyfish is a catch basin insert. They've proven very effective at removing particulates and sediment and phosphorus. No, it's a trade name. It's a product made by Contech, and they slide into the catch basins. And then we have to go around clean them periodically. So, if we're going to do, focus on the stormwater BMPs, the next step would be to develop a watershed plan, which evaluates the upstream sources of nutrients, identifies appropriate BMPs, and identifies vacant land and other locations which would be suitable for BMPs. Last one is dredging.
You're not allowed to do
Yeah, actually we are, and I've talked to the DC.
it. We weren't
Yeah.
allowed to do it.
All right, so anyway, dredging has a number of benefits. It would deepen the lake, it would moderate the temperature, it would get rid of the phosphorus that's within the lake. So there's a lot of pluses with going down the road of dredging. And if that's what the community wants to do, then what we would take a look at is evaluate the different methods of dredging. There are different methods. We can drain the lake. I've talked to some people who say, well, let's just do it and get it done and drain the lake for 2 years and dig all the sediment out. I've talked to others who have said, no, let's do a less invasive, limited area. We can look at the possibility of putting up turbidity curtains, doing the lake section by section. We can bring in companies that actually will vacuum out all the bottom sediments. All of them have a cost. So we'd have to determine a method of dredging, and then we'd have to do an engineering study, submit that to DEC. So these are the priority 1 projects that I think we need to focus on. At this point, we'll take any questions. And if anybody wants to mail their comments or questions in, that's the email that says supervisor@pattersonny.org, but it's really for the whole town board. Unfortunately, anybody that has any questions, I'd like to ask them to come up to the podium, to the mic, because we're recording this. So please come up.
It's a very quick question. Have you done any studying on the dredging? Oh, sorry.
No,
Have you done any studying in the for the dredging?
no, not yet. That's why we're here to find
So
out.
you have no cost analysis on that one?
No, I
Example, anything?
do not. Again, I looked at a number of different communities who have done dredging, tried to extrapolate out some costs. I would anticipate, and this is a really rough guess, that if we were to dredge the whole lake, we're looking at a price tag of about 10 to 15 million. Now, again, the plan here is to try to do this with grants, not to go back to the taxpayers and say, listen, we're going to go dredge the lake and here's your bill. You know, we're going to aggressively pursue grants to try to fund this. We have an opportunity right now because the state is focused on harmful algae blooms. They're focused on Putnam Lake. They've done this action plan, which is going to support us moving forward.
Which makes it more likely that you'd be approved for a grant.
Yes. Anybody else has any questions, please come up.
I have, I have two questions. I understand there's money available from New York City DEP for septic remediation. How much is it, and have we taken advantage of that money for, individual homeowners to, redo their septics? That's question one.
Go ahead.
And question two is, which option would give us the biggest bang for the buck? I think one of the areas was 28% pollution from the stormwater. Is that what I recall? I guess it makes sense to allocate money where we get the biggest benefit from that. And which one is it?
So where I think the community could get the biggest bang for the buck and not break the bank would be if we focused on a watershed management plan, looked at doing BMPs, tried to address the stormwater runoff, and at the same time pursued dredging.
Can you explain what BMPs are? for me?
Okay, BMPs are, and I did throw the slide up, if I can find it. So BMPs are best management practices, and there's a whole suite of different practices. People can have flower gardens on their property, but those flower gardens are put in a specific media with an underlying base that allows the water to infiltrate into the ground rather than go as runoff. There's a number of different green infrastructure techniques, from rain barrels to green roofs, water quality ponds. Marguerite, you know what a water quality pond is. There's one right outside the door. Stream bank stabilization. It's anything that actually slows the velocity of stormwater down, because that's really the culprit in driving the phosphorus into the lake. Is the faster the stormwater is running off of the land, the more phosphorus it carries with it, the more energy it has to move particulates through the watershed. So that would be my suggestion. As far as the DEC program you're referring to is in their filtration avoidance determination. And that program is really centered on the west of the Hudson, but also the basins east of Hudson that are part of the west of the Hudson reservoir system. And that's Boyd's Corners and West Branch. So, and we've lobbied for, I'm also part of a organization called the East of Hudson Watershed Corporation, and we've been lobbying on behalf of 19 municipalities within the East of Hudson Watershed for a number of different programs. We've been very successful at getting funding. We are currently waiting now for the next level of funding, which I believe is around $17 million we have to fund the corporation, where we can come in and start doing projects. We've already got projects scheduled in Putnam Lake to look at the stormwater, some stream bank stabilization projects. But forgot where I was going with that. So the program is for the west of Hudson really and not over here. And so Putnam Lake isn't eligible, the East Branch Reservoir watershed isn't eligible for those septic repair program. The county, with Ed Barnett, who's here with us tonight, ran a septic repair program for a number of years, but they didn't refund it. They terminated the program.
Rich, I know that in your presentation you mentioned something about aeration as also being a possible choice. If the cause of the harmful algae blooms is connected to nitrogen and phosphorus, correct? Would pumping oxygen into the lake through an aeration system help to resolve this problem, and can we explore that? I know it was something that we had looked at more than 5-6 years ago, and kind of went off the table. So is that something else that can also be pursued?
So that is certainly one of the recommendations that's in the plan. So everybody has an idea about what the importance of the aeration. When the oxygen gets depleted out of the lake, it creates a condition where phosphorus that's bound within the sediments gets released and is available to the algae to grow. So one of the techniques to stop that is to reoxygenate the water through aeration. I would say, yes, we've got to pursue aeration if we're not going to dredge. Now, we may take a look at it short term while we're preparing for dredging or not, I don't know, but aeration is somewhat of an expensive alternative, though everything we're looking at is an expensive alternative.
Rich, talk about the time frame. Ain't there was a bit of a time frame to this, like 5-year plan, and then they talk pretty much how they want to move pretty fast. And this all based on getting grants, or is this based on engineering?
Well, what they did is they came up with an action plan, kind of a conceptual plan based on, some past studies about what the issues may be and how to solve them within the lake. They expect us to take this plan and use this plan to pursue funding opportunities which they're going to make available. Typically, those funding opportunities are all tied up into a grant program, which the consolidated funding grant applications, it's the way the state now works their grants, where everything is all balled up into one package, and the applications are all due July 27th at 4 o'clock. Because they got these plans out late, they pulled a couple of components out of that CFA, and they are now running some grants which are not due to September 7th. So we have the opportunity for this program to apply for grants, and it's been pushed back to September 7th.
So what would be the first grant we'd be looking for?
Well, that's what we're here to find out, where everybody would like us to pursue. Do you want to focus on trying to sewer the lake, or do you want to focus on doing the BMPs or the dredging or alum? We can go for all of the above. I don't know how successful we're going to be, and I don't know whether I'll survive it, but we'll try. Pat?
Of the various options we have, they're all going to be grant funded to one degree or another. Is the sewering the only one that we're going to have to pick up part of the cost for? Or are there other ongoing costs for these other projects as well?
It really depends on the grant program. There are various grant programs out there. Some of them will fund 20% of the cost. Others will fund 80% of the costs. I don't know of any grant program that says we're going to fund 100% of the costs, but sometimes we can get creative. For example, if I can go get funding to put in new BMPs and we see a significant phosphorus reduction, I might be able to leverage the matching portion of that with funds from the East of Hudson watershed, which we have done in the past, so that there's no cost to the taxpayers. But, yeah, the initial thrust on all this from the town is going to be, we're going to try to pursue as many funding opportunities as we can to promote the direction the community wants to go in, and try to get creative as how we're going to fund everything so that it's not coming back to the taxpayers. Pat?
In lieu of the alum recommendation, if the application deadline is the 27th and alum is still prohibited, and the DEC has to do a study on that, we know how fast they move on studies,
Oh, yeah.
and there's no guarantee that they're going to find a consistent positive finding to support the use of alum, so it seems like it's not really a viable option. I know you said you supported it, but I don't see how it could be viable if we don't even know if it's really going to be supported in New York State. Does that make sense?
I understand. You know, I understand your question and concern completely. I have 3 gentlemen that I've worked with for many years up at the DEC in Albany who actually came to me and said, so how'd you like to treat your lake with alum? I said, well, it's not permitted. They said, well, we may be changing our mind. How'd you like to treat your lake with alum? So they included that in the management plan, treat the lake with alum. And so when I got the plan, I said, so where do we stand? What do you want to do? I mean, I know the funding is really due very soon, but you're not telling me it's permitted in New York State yet. What do you want me to do? I said, should I apply for the grant and hope that you get it all done? I will tell you that the silence from Albany was deafening. But they're not sure that everything is being done on the fly with this. I mean, honestly, to do a plan like this is a 2-year study they did in 3 months. It's full of problems that people haven't really thought through.
How much of this, New York State can do so much, but so much of the lake problems is because of what comes down from Connecticut. So I don't want to be put in this position where we're going to do all this stuff, but we're still going to have the problems because, like on stream, they talk about stream bank stabilization. That's in Connecticut. So, you know, all the grants, you know, how much we can do everything, and that we're still going to be stymied by what's coming. Again, my other question is, what's the minimum? What of all this is the minimum impact? I mean, we do have wildlife around here. What's the minimum impact for the wildlife in the lake? That'd be my second question.
Some of these programs, such as treating the lake with alum, part of the permitting process is we're going to have to do a study to examine exactly how that's going to impact the lake ecology. So I don't have an answer for you specifically, other than that these are areas that we're going to have to take a look at going forward. Same with dredging, same with a lot of the other programs. The second question was? Oh, so Hank was with me in New Paltz, and you know, one of the things we brought up about is, listen, you know, a good portion of our watershed is in Connecticut. It'd be great if you could give us some help with reaching out, because we can't do it town to town. We get nowhere. You really need to do this state to state. At that point, I don't think the light bulb had gone off that actually a good portion of the watershed was in the state of Connecticut. They didn't have an answer for us.
I just really, do you know what neighborhoods those? Just a silly, do you know what neighborhoods are included in that 287?
It's basically, well, it's 250 feet around the lake. When they got onto the eastern side, they went right to the Connecticut border.
Okay.
All right? But it is predominantly
Just
all
the houses
properties
around the
on-
lake?
Yeah,
Yeah.
on Lake Shore, South Lake Drive. I don't think it went up to East Lake, Waterford.
Okay.
Marguerite?
It seems with all of the alum, what's already in the lake bed, all of these problems are temporary fixes. But it seems the dredging would actually probably be the only thing that would solve all of these. I'm not saying it won't happen again 30 years from now, 40 years from now, but doesn't it seem that the dredging is really the only thing that would take care of what's already in the lake bed? And we would then have to solve what's coming in. But you've always said, and it's true, even if we look to what's coming in, we still have to take care of what's already there. The only way to do that is the alum, but the alum is a temporary fix. We don't even know if we could use the alum yet. So the only solution then would be dredging, would be the temporary, other than the aeration, which also would need a second part to that. I mean, aeration is not a complete fix either. I think what I'm saying is we'd have all these little pieces, but the dredging would be the one solution that would almost take care of all of it except for the perimeter of what's coming in. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And I understand that New York State is a little, you know, the other states have been, I've been reading for the last couple of years, the other states have been studying the blue-green algae and trying to figure out what to do with it. There is no solution per se, and it's not like a magic pill. So it's what does each individual lake do for itself? You know, what is the puzzle fit for our particular lake? Dredging is very expensive. We've talked about it for many years. But unless we can dig out what's in there, how do we solve? How do we, it's going to keep on causing a problem.
Would copper sulfate help?
Copper sulfate, oh, it would be, sorry, no, it's okay.
That's all they always used to use it. We didn't have the problem that they have now.
Copper sulfate will inhibit the algae growth. It won't get rid of the underlying problem, which is the phosphorus. And I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe what the copper sulfate is going to do is it's going to kill the algae. Pat? Pat, who knows more about the chemical treatment?
Sorry. The product we are using, and we have been using for the past 5 years, is a product called Cutrine Plus, which is a 9% copper solution. It's a lower amount of copper, and it binds better with the algae that's in the water column that's between the top and the bottom somewhere. It does less of a good job on the filamentous algae, but it does a better job on what's floating in the water, which is really what our concern is.
But it does kill the algae.
It's an algicide, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the concern is the dead algae then becomes a source of dissolved phosphorus. So it's kind of keeping that cycle going.
That's like everything what's coming down the ball pond is still in our lake. That's another. Right. Unless that's just going to keep going on and on and on. Just polluting the lake. All the stuff is coming down every time. All the brooks are coming down. All the mountains. It's still in the lake. All those catch basins that you got filled up with silt all the time. Ball pond.
Well, the good news is we're catching the silt before it's getting into the lake. It's costing us for the ongoing maintenance, constantly maintaining those structures. We need to put more in. We're looking at Dayton Road, the channel erosion coming out of Connecticut. We're going to stabilize that. And we're also looking at the end of Valley Road, which is where the drainage is coming down from that huge channel that's up in New Fairfield. We're looking at that as putting some sort of treatment measure in there so we can...
Farming Road, by Hudson Drive, there's a brook coming right down.
Yep.
It's a big...
Yeah. So we are looking at all these things to stabilize the streams and try to stop the sediment coming down. It would be better for us if the sediment wasn't coming down in the first place. But again, the town, as most of you know who've been involved in this, has tried to talk to New Fairfield year after year after year, and they don't want to know anything about what's going on in their watershed. And they just keep pushing everything back down to Putnam Lake. And that's unfortunate. if it's going to get addressed, it has to get addressed state to state. Our DEC with Connecticut's DEP, and the DEP needs to come to the town in Fairfield.
What's going to happen if you do decide to dredge the lake with all the carpet kids put in, 300 carpets? They're going to die.
Again, I'm not sure how we're going to dredge the lake. If we do it the way, yep, so,
Can I get a shot in here or what?
go. Sorry.
When you're talking about dredging the lake, Putman Lake is strictly rock. So when the water, I mean, how are you gonna know how deep you can go with the dredging?
When we hit rock.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Putman Lake is all rock, so you can might only go down, take 1 foot of the soot out, and then you're on rock.
Well, we know that there's a lot of sediment that's gone into the lake. I mean, we have seen when we draw the lake down, all the sediment that's gone into the lake, especially on the east side. So certainly that can be removed, and that's going to be a big part of the problem.
All right, all right.
But before we actually do any dredging, we would have to come up with a plan. We'd have to go in there with augers and actually measure how much sediment there is,
All right.
how deep it is to the bedrock. It may be only a foot, it may be 5 feet, we don't
All
know.
right.
And then figure.
Now, if you could take out a lot of dirt out of there, where does that dirt go? Because I've been around here a long time, and I've seen guys build ponds and take the dirt and build houses.
Yeah.
So,
We would
dirt
have-
is valuable. So, you know what I mean with the dirt? If you could pull out a lot of dirt out of there, where does that dirt go, to the company or that's doing the dredging?
Typically nowadays, nobody is looking for large volumes of fill the way they were years ago. I know people who have fill can't give it away. The fill that we would be pulling out of Putnam Lake really is a very fine granular material that is mostly coming from eroded soils and/or winter maintenance
All right.
materials. So it's not really good for anything.
All right.
So, but that would all be part of a bidding process with the
Alright.
contractor. We would have to figure out. I know we've got another project that we are looking at that they're gonna have a lot of fill coming off of the site. And one of the problems that we have is it's driving the cost of the project up because you can't get rid of the fill.
All right.
So,
I'd like to thank the Park District too. Do a lot of work.
The BMPs seem to be one of the preventive measures, and it also seems to be a low-ticket item, if I understand this correctly. Can you explain a little more, a rain garden, how does that work? Is that something an individual has to do, can do? Do you come in, do you do it? What does green infrastructure mean? How does that actually function?
well, there's a couple of different ways. Certainly an individual on their property could do it just as, trying to do the best for the lake. The other way is the town could seek funding and then offer incentives to each property owner. We would go on, build the rain garden. If we did that, we'd have to get an easement from everybody who put a rain garden on their property. And essentially what a rain garden is going to do is it's going to capture the stormwater runoff that's coming off of your roofs or your driveway or maybe your lawn area and channel it into a depression that is actually filled in with gravel so that it enhances the percolation into the ground. And then a specific soil media, again, which is designed to try to remove pollutants out of the stormwater runoff. And then it's top dressed as a garden with flowers and shrubs and whatever you would like to see. Rain garden. Anyone else?
Rich, you mentioned just a minute ago easements, and just a question about, could you not just go on the border of New York and Connecticut and perhaps get easements from various people and put in some kind of filtration system there where all of that sediment wouldn't travel down to Putnam Lake and filter it out?
Well,
if we could do that along the border of New York and Connecticut, not going in.
Yeah, that's currently what we've been looking at. That's the same principle of we put the hydrodynamic separators in. So it's capturing that. We're starting to work our way back up towards the Connecticut border where we have available land. In the future, you know, if we're going to get everything we need to get, we're probably going to have to acquire some land or get easements. Part of what I suggested here is a watershed plan that would look at Putnam Lake in a very holistic manner right now, look at all the property so that we would have a better idea rather than do this piecemeal as we are doing it.
Rich, pretty much everybody's looking at money here, like always. You know, dredging is going to cost so much, sewer is going to cost so much. I mean, the bottom line is, how much money are we going to get from the state? I mean, if we're going to get a good chunk, then we want the best we could get. We're only going to get a little bit. We want to get what we can afford. But it seems like here we're really not going to make a decision until we decide how much money we're going to get. Now, I mean, we're not to saying, hey, we're going to give you $150 million. Well, maybe we definitely think about doing the sewers. I mean, the sewer is probably the best thing for us, if it could be done. It would enhance everyone's property value here. All the sewer problems would disappear. And I mean, if the state pays for it, that would be great. If the state doesn't pay for it, then probably the next big option would be dredging. And that's going to be another big ticket item. So, you know, we can talk to a blue in the face, but without knowing how much money we're going to get. Really, you know, we can really make a decision here. I mean, of course nobody wants us to take money out of their pocket and pay for something. But we have to know what are we going to have to pay for and how much the state's going to pay. It's like you're asking us to make a decision on something we really don't know what we're going to pay for. It's like buying a house that we don't know how much it costs. And after you buy it, we're going to decide how much money we're going to give you. It makes it tough for everybody here. I would, you know, if the state could give us a rough idea of how much dredging is going to cost, and then we can go for the grant. I mean, sewers, you know, everyone's going sewers. I mean, nobody wants to pay money for sewers, I agree. And if we're going to sewer it, we should sewer all Hilltop. We shouldn't do 200 houses around the lake. But, I mean, it's all based on the money we're going to get from the state. So, you know, when is the state or when are the grant promises going to happen, or at least tell us how much money we're going to get?
That would be great. I would love that if the state would say, here's a pot of money, how are you going to spend it? But they're not doing that. They're saying, here's a plan. We're going to support your moving forward with the plan. Here's the steps that you need to take. And we'd like you to apply for a competitive grant.
How much? We give them a number?
We give them a number, and they tell us whether they think they're going to fund it or not.
So shouldn't we just get a grant for a high number and see what happens?
But they want specific proposals. It's not like I can say, hey, geez, we're going to go implement the action plan. You know, go give me, you know, a couple $1 million to start. You know, I've got to come up with a specific program with specific numbers for them.
So say we go dredging, the next step, that are the big dollar item. We might have to pay for that out of our pocket. So we really don't know how much money we're going to be pulling out of our pocket. And I think that's the gray area here. We like to know how much our taxes are going to go up.
Well, again, you know, the initial, I'm sorry, what?
You have seniors who are on fixed incomes also.
Yes, I understand, which is why we're looking for a little direction, you know, to see what your priorities are. I mean, I can assume what your priorities are, or I can, you know, say, geez, these are my priorities, and this is what I'm going to pursue funding for this year. But, you know, we want to hear what the community has to say, and then we're going to apply for what we can apply for. You know, we're going to do the best we can, is trying to get as much money to do as much of the program as we can.
Could we get prices for everything? I mean, could we get estimates for everything and then?
Part of the grants that we're going to need to apply for is going to further develop those costs. Yeah.
But Hank's right, in a way, you know, dredging is a good idea, you know, it is a great idea. All of these are good ideas, but we don't know what we can afford. And if it's kind of buying a pig in a poke, if we have no idea, what will we get back? You know, I know we have to do something, but you know, it would help us a lot to be able to know what we could afford to do, and what they're going to help us with. You know, they're asking us to decide, but they're not really telling us you know, whether or not, how much they're gonna help us.
But you're not locked in.
No,
You apply for a grant, and if you don't get it, you don't move forward.
but they're asking us to decide though, aren't they? I mean,
No, they're not asking you to do anything. I'm here looking to involve the community in a plan. You know, and this goes back to,
I thought they were asking,
no, they're not asking me for anything. Actually, it's very disappointing that, you know, when this whole program was first announced and, you know, we heard about it, we were fairly excited. We thought we were going to get $500,000 to take a look at the lake. We thought that there was going to be a stakeholders group that was created out of people within the community, that they were going to have public hearings down here. They didn't do any of that. And they have no intention of asking the community anymore what they want. The town board felt that it was a good idea to have this, to try to explain the plan, and to have a dialogue with the community before we move forward.
it is, it's a wonderful idea, thank you for doing that, because that,
Whoever.
Here's the thing, Rich. You're the town, is going to apply for a grant, let's say for the dredging. It's $15 million, right? That's the tentative plan. You put in a grant for $15 million, and they are only going to give you 10, let's say.
Yep.
So we, the taxpayers in the Putnam Lake Park District, not the rest of the town, are going to have to pick up the tab for that $5 million. Do we have the right to say to them at that point, I'm sorry, we can't afford the $5 million, take back your 10? Or are we obliged to accept the 10?
So I apologize if in doing this presentation I wasn't as clear perhaps as I could have been. My recommendation, how I think we're going to be proceeding forward with this, using dredging as an example, we're not going to apply for $15 million to dredge the lake. We're going to apply for $500,000 to do the engineering study so we can develop the cost analysis so that we have the basis for applying for the additional funding. At any, you know, and this is all going to be a series of steps. Same with doing the wastewater treatment. We would be applying we would be applying for a grant of say $500,000 to do the further analysis to really start scoping out where those pump stations need to be, what size the sewer lines, where the wastewater treatment plant's going to be, so that we have a better idea about what the cost is. Now, if we do that second phase of the study and it comes back, well, geez, it's not 25 million, it's 50 million, right? We go back to the community and say, what do you want to do?
As long as the state pays for it, it's okay. It's all based on the grant.
I understand that, but I will tell you this, that it is highly unlikely the state is going to pay 100% of anything.
From the numbers that you were showing, you have only 25%, possibly high number on a septic load. You have 75% of the additional sediment coming down into the lake from other sources. By addressing septic system of only addressing 25% possibly,
right,
is not really, it doesn't seem to be cost effective in a sense that you have more stuff already in the lake that's possibly could be cheaper to handle. And then the best management practices seems to be ongoing, basically resolving what is going to come into the lake. So I think the septic approach seems to be a high cost. Dredging, we don't know the numbers. And the BMP seems the best, you know, going forward, that seems to be to address it anyway. Whatever you do, it doesn't make any difference. This is the way to make sure there's no additional load coming into the lake.
You're correct. You're correct.
I was going to, in terms of cost, what seems to be happening here, the BMTPs, does what the gentleman says, that seems to be doable, and from most of that costs relatively. Then you've got ALM, which buys us some time, dredging, and then lastly, most costly would be the sewers. So it would seem to me if you're worried about, if we're, the storm BMPs has a lot going for it, and because it solves, like the gentleman pointed out, some of the what's coming into the lake, and then dredging or ALM takes care of what's there, and then I can't for the life of me see the sewer issue. So.
Thank you.
Employing best practices is going to prevent, but it's not going to treat what's already there.
You got something, Chris?
Yeah, I was just question, the estimated study of the estimated cost, you know, with the everybody doing their pricing and everything, how much is that?
I don't know. Sitting here right now, I don't
Okay,
know.
no, I'm just a question.
Yep.
And then the study to find out whether you could do the sewers or not, you don't have that number either.
No, I don't have.
So those could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, listen, I will tell you, to
No,
do
no.
the feasibility analysis is gonna probably run somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000.
Absolutely. No, but that's in part of what we're looking at.
Yes. Matt, come on over.
So the wastewater treatment, that's an ongoing tax burden, regardless, because you're going to have to pay for the maintenance, the ongoing treatment of the water. So regardless of if you do that or how much money you get, the tax burden on the community will be ongoing forever. The chemicals are a fix for the problem now, but all they do is they bind the phosphorus, and the phosphorus goes to the bottom until later. And then after the chemical binding is over, the phosphorus will come back to the surface. The only fix is the phosphorus to be taken out. And that's phosphorus that's collected since the inception of Putt Lake. And it's come from poor septic systems, no septic systems, farmland, all the farm animals that were here before this. It's come from all that, so it has to be removed, period. But the dredging, it's not going to be an ongoing tax burden because it's a one-time cost, like the water treatment plant would be, because you don't have to maintain a dredger. It's one and done. The chemicals I don't like because I swim in the lake pretty much weekly, and I don't like to be covered in chemicals, nor do I like to be covered in algae, but the algae I can wash off. The chemicals, I don't know what they do to me. But if my vote would be the dredging and the BMPs.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
After all that ditto, I really like what you had to say. And I'm wondering if you can apply for 2 grants for the feasibility studies for the dredging and for these.
I could actually apply for 4 grants. I could apply for 5 grants. I could pursue every one of those up there. Here's.
What's Evans Murphy?
Let me get into the mic. So, yeah, I could apply for multiple grants. There's no limit on the number of grants I can apply for. The problem is I start competing against myself, and we run the risk of something that is low priority to the community being a high priority to the DEC, so we get the low priority funded and the high priority to the community, we don't get it. Which is why I'm looking for a little guidance from the community about what's really important to you. What do you want?
As of putting the chemicals in the lake, I've been swimming this lake for 74 years. My children, my grandchildren, my parents, grandparents, you never got sick, any kind of rashes, anything. So chemicals are not going to hurt you. You don't swim the day and put them in, after that you're fine. Didn't kill the fish, got rid of the weeds, doesn't have the weeds, the algae and all that. And the carpet taking care of the weeds.
Well, you always have to continually put the chemicals in because the chemicals binding.
Okay.
We did it in May,
Time out, if we could stop the back and forth. Mr. Johnson, you had a question?
Good evening. Have we checked or asked other lake districts, what did they do? Or towns or the state of Connecticut, what did they do with their lakes, since apparently seems to be, everybody seemed to have had this problem? And if so, what was the outcome? So we could use what they've done to help us.
That's a great comment. That's kind of what the consultant for the state did when they developed the action plan. They looked at what other communities did as well.
Sure. To counteract, you stated earlier that when you may mention Connecticut, it's like they didn't know Connecticut existed. The water came from nowhere. Argument's sake, that's what you said earlier. So the state didn't, there was an oversight for the state in that sense.
It wasn't, just to be clear, it wasn't an oversight because, the individuals with the DEC I deal with are very, very knowledgeable about our area, surprisingly so. It's just when they picked the lake, the light bulb didn't go off that half of the lake half of the lake watershed is in Connecticut. I mean, I've heard from them since that had they thought that through, because of the complications in trying to affect any sort of serious management plan involving Connecticut, they might have picked a different lake, but by then it was too late.
Could you go back to the slide where you have I think it was 4 options that we have? And do you have any preliminary numbers on these 4 options?
That one?
Yeah.
So, as I said, this was a plan. This was not done by the town. This was done by the state. One of the deficiencies, I believe, in the plan, which I brought to them early on, I said, this isn't going to do us a lot of good unless we have numbers. The consultant didn't give us any numbers except for the wastewater treatment feasibility study that they did where they looked at a number of different options. That's the only one that the state provided us any sort of guidance as far as what the cost might be.
So it means we have absolutely no idea at this point what these 4 items would be.
I've looked at other areas. I've looked at what it's cost other lakes. I did provide some numbers within the slides about what I think it might
It
cost.
seems like these 4 items will be very different in cost. Some will be extremely high and some will be very manageable, correct?
Well, there's one in particular, if we went forward with the wastewater treatment plant. Now, I don't think anybody's going to go forward with the wastewater treatment plant unless the state is paying it. So, and the same with most of these, but honestly, if we're just looking at the raw dollars, I probably could do the alum treatment, the stormwater BMPs, and the dredging for the same amount of money that, we're talking about for just doing the wastewater treatment plant.
The actual work or the next step?
The whole program, soup to nuts. So the wastewater treatment plant is certainly the most costly alternative, but that's not to say it's not going to provide a substantial bang for the buck, because the groundwater is transmitting not particulate phosphorus, but dissolved phosphorus, and that is more readily available to the algae to create the algae blooms. So if there's 22% of the phosphorus going into the lake from septic systems within 250 feet around the lake, the wastewater treatment plant may actually solve the problem.
However, if you go to the stormwater BMPs, you may be lowering what goes into the lake.
You will certainly stop this, you will slow down the amount of sediment. You will slow down the amount of phosphorus. The problem with BMPs is they're not 100% effective. In New York State, the metric is 60%. If you're getting 60% of the phosphorus, the 60% of the particulate phosphorus out of the water column as it's passing through the BMPs, you're considered to have a successful BMP. So it's not going to get all the phosphorus out.
So of the 4 items, if I read this room correctly, the chemical treatment is not really favored. So the other 3, what prevents you from going ahead and doing the next study and then come back with a number so that we can make an intelligent decision?
That's exactly where we want to go.
That's what we
Thank
want.
Connecticut, to what extent the residents of Connecticut use Putnam Lake? And if anybody here is from Connecticut, so to what extent can we get those residents involved and the counties, neighboring counties involved in remediating?
Oh God, how I would love to get the counties together.
So, well, doesn't anybody from Connecticut use the lake?
It was tongue-in-cheek because
okay.
Connecticut's government does not have county government at all.
Oh,
Which
I
is
see.
why I
So
said
if
it has to be done at a state-to-state level. Our New York
I see.
State DEC, meaning the mirror of our DEC is the Connecticut DEP. So if those 2 agencies got together, agreed that they were going to work on a solution to the problem, then Connecticut DEP could, I'm sorry,
Okay,
let me
sure.
get to the mic. Then Connecticut's DEP could talk to the town of New Fairfield and say, you must, you shall, you will.
But aren't there residents in that town that use the lake?
There are residents.
I'm new here, so I don't know.
No. There are residents in the town of New Fairfield that have deeded lake rights. And so they need to pay a fee to use the beaches, but they have the right to go swim on the lake.
I see. But they don't really have a
Or both.
voice, any clout on their, not enough people to
They
affect
don't
anything?
have a group of people that are from New Fairfield. And I don't know if anybody's here from Connecticut. Anyone else? Sir. It's much more fun when we're here for breakfast, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. First, thanks for all the information so far. I feel like there's just a lot of open-ended questions. We don't really know what the loom treatment of the lake, how it's going to affect the environment, us, and also like the fish and animals that are around the lake. Wastewater treatment plant seems like insanity. And the stormwater BMP seems like it'll be something ongoing forever. So we're gonna have to maintain that even after we dredge the lake. So what's the cost for that? And I know you already talked about, we don't know the numbers yet, but we can't make intelligent decisions without those numbers. And that's where I'm getting a little frustrated. The dredging part, again, we don't have any kind of quotes from any, contractors on how much that's going to cost, and we don't know how much it's going to cost to continue maintenance of all the stormwater BMPs after they're installed. That's all I got.
So I agree with you. I share your frustration. When you're doing a study like this, as I said, you can't do it in 3 months and do a really quality job. I would have preferred that they had come back with some more hard numbers that we could be pursuing. They didn't do that. They didn't come back to the community. They didn't say, what can we do? They gave me a report and they said, here's the plan that we're willing to support you're pursuing competitive grants for. Go apply for the grants. And so the next step is to start doing the feasibility analysis that this study should have done for the $500,000 they were talking about, so that we can have better numbers, so we can come back and engage the community and say, well, here's where we are. You want to go forward? You want to go in a different direction?
All right, Rich, what's the next plan then? Are we gonna have a town vote? We're gonna have a special election? Are we gonna just, we got 50 people here, we're gonna show of hands what we want to vote on? I mean, what's your next step?
Listen, I think I've heard a lot of good input from the community about what they think is important, what they think is acceptable. So the next step would be for me to start applying for grants for different you know, elements of the management plan to try to move them forward in a way that's going to be acceptable to the DEP or DEC.
Now the community vote on the decision of what you want to go for a grant for, or are you pretty much going to put a grant for everything?
Listen, we have town board meetings the second and fourth Wednesday of every month. This is all going to be talked about. When we get a grant application that we're comfortable with, that we're going to move forward, it's going to be on the town board agenda. Please watch we televise it. If you can watch it, if you can come to a town board meeting, stay involved. We'll try to disseminate as much information as we can. Sometimes I get a little harried and I, slip up a little bit as far as getting the word out. But, we're trying to engage the community here. We're trying to do that. And so if you see us, maybe doing a grant application that you're really not comfortable with or you have questions about, please feel free, call my office or come see the town board at a meeting.
Hey, couple things. The alum treatment, to me, sounds like you're just going to kick it down the road. It's going to last for 11 years, 10 years, whatever, and you got to do something again. I mean, from what I'm getting from you people is we've been kicking it down the road for 80 years. The lake's been here 80 years. Oh, yeah. So, these problems didn't just occur. Waste treatment plant, I don't think it's feasible. Stormwater, well, we have those retention ponds, right? How much does it cost? A, we need more. B, I don't think they're deep enough. That's just my personal opinion. How much does it cost to add extra retention ponds, and how much are we paying yearly how many times a year do you clean it out, those retention ponds? That's a cost that these people could learn, help them with their knowledge. We're already doing chemical treatments already, so we continue that. We put in more of those ponds, and when I was first involved in the Putt Lake District, the number one thing that they all talked about was dredging the lake. That is what you have to do. You have to continue the treatment that we're doing, more of the stormwater, BMPs, whether it's the retention ponds, and you have to dredge the lake, in my opinion. Thank you.
To address a couple of your points, the ponds are sized based on the contributing area, contributing drainage area, so they're specifically sized. Same with the hydrodynamic separators. They certainly only are sized for a very small contributing area, which is why we need a lot more of them to cover the whole area. Currently, the town of Patterson is spending between $8,000 and $15,000 a year, depending on what we're doing, on maintenance on both sides of the town of the stormwater practices. We actually have negotiated an agreement, all the towns have, so that those improvements are being funded, the maintenance of those improvements are being funded currently by the East of Hudson Watershed Corporation. So it's not costing the taxpayers, it's costing a little bit, but not a lot. So most of the funding for the maintenance is coming from some other source.
Just on the maintenance of those, I know this is a ballpark, do you know how many tonnage they've taken out?
We track, I don't have the tonnage, I can
Well,
convert it.
I do, I just figured I'd ask
Yeah,
that,
if
you know.
you want to call my office, I can give you.
Or I could talk to Russ or whatever.
Yeah.
But the other thing was, on the dredging, like, this is a good thing, everybody thinks it's gotta be done. How long would the lake be out of water?
2 years, it said if you do one. Possibly 2 years, again.
What,
Ballpark, yes.
That's ballpark.
Yes.
But I'm saying, they, even though they suggested it, they don't have a time frame for, not knowing the probe and everything like that?
You can go online, you can look at the report, they gave me no information on it.
So 2 years, there would be nothing. and it'd be really stanky.
Or we put up a turbidity curtain across the cove and we go in and clean the cove out. Then we move that to the north end of the lake and we clean the north end
Right,
of the
no,
lake
no,
out. We do
okay.
it in sections. Or we get a vac in there to actually back the sediment out of the bottom. They do it.
No, I understand that. I was just curious because I didn't hear that part. I wasn't in.
So there are options that we need to evaluate. Mrs. Booker.
If they drain by section, because they can't drain the lake completely, because the fire department needs the water to take out the park. What's the best? So we have to do that in sections.
We would have, the community would have to have.
Whatever they're gonna do in sections.
Right.
If they can't drain the lake completely.
We'd have to have that dialogue, especially, and involve the fire department, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
If you go for the next round of grants and then the following studies, how long will that take roughly?
Anywhere between 1 and 2 years, I think it.
Go to the mic, Rick. Thanks.
Yeah. If you did a 9-element watershed plan, which is something recommended from the EPA, you know, that's probably going to be about at least an 18-month, and then, you know, a few more months to involve the community in the plan, you know, to, you know, get their input. The others, the alum treatment, probably, you know, 6 months. Dredging would be a little bit longer. You know, you're going to have to, for some of these, you're going to have to study the lake ecology over a period of time, and it depends on what we're looking at.
Now, Peach Lake on the other side of 84, off of 121, they went through a big change, and they put a sewer system in their area. Do you know anything about what they did and how they went about it and how much it cost those people?
I do know. And that was at a time that things were a little bit more flexible with the DEP. It's been a long time, so I don't remember all of the details, but they've got a pressurized system with basically a grinder pump station on each individual piece of property. Yeah, I can tell you now that I deal extensively with Warren Lucas, who's supervisor of the town of North Salem, who's always pulling his hair out, because every time there's a power outage, they have like 2,000 grinder pump stations that have no power, or they find out that somebody's wired in a generator backwards and burned it out, or they're having all sorts of problems down there. But overall, I think it's a good system. It's working well for them. They have noticed a significant change in the quality of the lake from doing that. But it was very, very expensive. And they received funding from, I believe, the Army Corps, the DEP, and the East of Hudson watershed funds to do that. What was? Yeah. And it's similar to what we did in the hamlet in Patterson. By way of a little background, we had 3 wastewater treatment plants in the hamlet. They were failing in different levels of failure. And so the DEP came to us, the town of Patterson, and said, would you consider building a single wastewater treatment plant and take these 3 in? And we said yes, but we were going to take in a couple of areas as well, and negotiated that all out. DEP is a lot of fun to work with, I can tell you. They, not only on that project, but they came to us with the A&P. They said, geez, the system's failed for the 3rd time. We could take that in as well, and then they torture us trying to get the permits, literally torture us. They're impossible to work with. But they got significant amount of funding, and most of that project was paid for with other people's money. It's what we would be looking to do here. It's just that things have tightened up a little bit. DEP's not looking to make the investment they once were. So I don't know how supportive they would be of this plan. We could ask. Anyone else?
I just wanted to thank you and the board for helping us and going over everything. And I know it's not a simple solution. It's not just dredging or just, it's a multi-pronged solution, something we have to, we have to guard what's coming in as well as what's in there. So, but thank you very much for your time and for helping us decide.
So, on behalf of myself and the town board, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I can tell you honestly, I would prefer to have the DEC standing here trying to explain this than me doing it, but somebody had to do it, and I got elected. So, yeah. So, with that, if there's no more questions, I've got town board members scattered all over, but can I get a motion to adjourn? Can I get a second? All in favor? Let's go home.